Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The UK's trade with the European Union can be at least as free following Brexit as it is now, according to the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox. He said introducing tariffs on trade would be bad, not just for Britain, but for all of Europe. But in this pre-negotiation period, politicians on the continent have been keen to warn that Britain will not get any kind of special treatment on leaving the EU. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
Taking back control. Dr. Liam Fox, today at a flight simulation business, trying to plot a smooth landing for Britain, where free trade is the cornerstone of our relationship with the European Union and the rest of the world.
I believe that the UK is in a prime position to become a world leader in free trade because of the brave and historic decision of the British people to leave the European Union. Those who believe that the referendum was a sign of Britain looking inwards have it completely 100% wrong.
Yesterday, car manufacturers in Britain warned that if there were tariffs between Britain and the European Union once we had left, that could mean job losses. Do you agree with that?
Who does it harm more if we end up in a new tariff environment? It's in everybody's interest that as we move forward, we have at least as free a trading environment as we have today. Anything else may not harm the politicians and the institutions, but it will harm the people of Europe.
This is Manchester Town Hall, a monument to the glories of our free trade past. And it was here that Dr. Fox gave, I think, the strongest signal about the future. Not only would Britain be leaving the European Union, we would be leaving the single market. This feels like a hard Brexit. At the Paris Motor Show, concern. If Britain leaves the single market, that could mean tariffs. And for the Nissan boss, and that company runs a huge factory in Sunderland, tariffs mean only one thing.
It would mean obviously that Sunderland will lose competitiveness when it comes to choosing a place where we will be sourcing the products for Europe, because all of a sudden you're taking 10% higher cost for tax reasons.
From big business to small business.
These conveyors here are going to Sweden.
This one near Manchester makes conveyor belts. The message is the same.
Tariff-free trade is extremely important to us. We do not want to be put at a disadvantage by incurring additional costs, because in a competitive market you can't put your prices up to reflect it.
Britain's trade exports are one of the fundamental drivers of economic growth. We export £222 billion worth of goods to the EU, a trade few want to put at risk. That is more than twice the £100 billion worth of exports that go to America, and nearly 10 times the £26 billion worth of exports that go to China. The UK's trade with the EU matters. Dr. Fox came to Manchester to send a message. Britain wants free trade deals. But negotiations with the EU post-Brexit won't officially start for years. Yes, the tone at the moment is tough, but this journey has an awful long way to go. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News, Manchester.
Live to Rome now, and our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Katya, in this pre-Brexit choreography, Liam Fox is setting out his negotiating position. But you've been talking to the Italian Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, and he's talking tough on Brexit too.
Well, look, Fiona, Matteo Renzi is an Anglophile. I can't imagine the EU without the UK, he says. But he is also a Europhile, a true believer in the European project. And while we in the UK tend to get focused on Brexit, elsewhere on the continent there are other EU matters that are crying out to be dealt with. Here in Italy, for example, they're still stuck in the migrant crisis with boats arriving almost daily from Africa. They're also stuck in the Eurozone stagnation too. So Matteo Renzi expressed the frustration that he and other EU leaders feel that they are still waiting, as wait they must under EU rules, for the UK to start those formal Brexit talks.
There is the need to solve as soon as possible the problem of UK, because from 2015 to today, for the first months of 2015 to today, we discussed a lot of times about Brexit. So now it's time to solve the question.
And just how tough should or could those EU-UK negotiations get? I asked Matteo Renzi. Of course, he said they should remain cordial, they should be constructive, but don't forget that EU leaders are worried that if the UK gets a great deal outside the EU, other EU members might be tempted to jump ship. Matteo Renzi was firm. The UK could not expect a special deal once it's outside the EU. But as you're pointing out, Fiona, these are pre-Brexit negotiation talks. They're talks about talks, and at the moment, all sides in the UK and in the rest of the EU are talking tough. They're flexing their muscles. But once the real process begins, you can expect quite some wheeling and dealing.
Katja in Rome, thank you.
Now, it's not often you hear a politician talk of the glorious joy of free trade. But that was exactly the phrase used by the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, who's been urging the world to tear down the barriers of protectionism. But what about businesses which have been hoping for more protection, like British Steel, rescued from the floundering Tata empire? Its boss has told this programme that although they're back in profit, they want government action to help the industry. Here's our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi.
In steel, the big cavalry has gone. That was today's verdict in Scunthorpe from the new boss of British Steel. After 100 days in business, the newly forged smaller company says it's already gone back into profit. But bubbling under the surface is a hardening frustration with the pace of government action.
How much industry do you really want to have in your country? I'm not sure they ever answered that question. If you don't answer that question, you have no strategy.
But 90 miles away in Manchester, the new trade minister was showcasing a different vision.
My message today is a simple one. Free trade has and will continue to transform the world for the better.
But hang on, many voters will feel that Brexit should mean more backing for British industry. But after a whistle-stop tour of 6 countries, Liam Fox has returned home in favour of open doors rather than Britain first.
Terrible truth about protectionism is that while it might be a short-term vote winner or temporarily prop up failing industries, it's always the consumer and often the poorest in society that will ultimately lose out.
But that's not how they see it in Scunthorpe.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't think the government has an industrial strategy. I don't think they honestly understand manufacturing in the slightest. I keep meeting with them, they keep promising me this and that, then they get back on the trains and they go back to London and forget all about us.
Good to be back. Happy of Just yesterday, another former Tata business was also being brought back to life, with a different statesman on hand to take the credit. But for the rest of Tata's much larger Port Talbot rank and file, the future still hangs in the balance.
In this industry, patience with politicians is running out. It's far too early to call a renaissance in steel. Output this year is due to be at its lowest level since the 1930s, and here in Scunthorpe they say government support is vital. Theresa May will have to decide how much of her industrial strategy is about getting involved and how much is about free trade.
I have not seen a serious result coming out of that, and especially I have not seen any actions in that frame.
The one action the government has taken is to give the go-ahead for the Hinkley Point nuclear reactor. Contracts were signed today with China, but it hasn't been easy. Handing the £18 billion deal to state-backed foreign businesses has sparked controversy. Now British Steel say it's up to the Prime Minister to prove this joined-up thinking by making sure it's businesses like them that get to deliver on these grand projects.
Helia Ebrahimi at the Scunthorpe Steelworks, British Steelworks.
Not for the first time since the Brexit vote, government spin doctors talked up a speech on life outside the EU by a key minister before the much-touted speech was delivered. Today it was the turn of Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary and ardent campaigner for leaving the EU, to push the message. So, apart from the much-trailed mantra about a golden future, what detail did Mr Fox have to offer? Well, judge for yourself, but if anything, at times it sounded like this Eurosceptic minister actually wants just as close a trading relationship with the EU as before.
Britain voted to Brexit almost 100 days ago. Today, the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, set out what that will mean for our prosperity. In the very building in Manchester where the result of the referendum was announced, he spoke passionately and vaguely of the glorious joy of free trade.
The British people have presented us with a glorious opportunity to reset our global trading relationships, place ourselves back at the centre of an increasingly interconnected world and build an economy that works for all.
Fine words, but away from the hall, and businesses are wondering whether Brexit will make the trade they do more expensive. As it stands, this brewery exports around 2,500 barrels of beer every year, tariff-free, to the 27 other countries that make up the European Union. Now, the company calculates if Britain were to leave the single market as well as the EU, then it would probably add around 50 euro cents to the price of each of their bottles. But they're pretty relaxed about the prospect.
We think our offer, our quality, our history, our heritage and our brands will be able to survive tariffs of that nature.
But Britain's car industry is worried. Nissan says it will stop investing in its plant in Sunderland until it's clear what trade deals Britain can negotiate with the rest of the EU.
Well, if it was, for example, tax imposed on products coming from the UK to Europe, it would be something very detrimental to the development of our presence in the UK.
Lord Jim O'Neill resigned from government last week. The economist tasked to deliver a northern powerhouse told me the project is still on track, but that if Britain does leave the single market, the north in particular will suffer.
The course of the exit, especially with respect to trade agreements, the more likely it's going to have a negative consequence.
And that would be felt particularly in the northeast?
I think the northeast is probably the more vulnerable because that is an area that is heavily involved in manufacturing. And of course, in particular if you delve into certain products, the auto industry.
Liam Fox believes EU nations won't impose tariffs on British exports because it would be an act of self-harm. He preaches free trade, but he can't be sure he'll deliver it. Joel Hills, News at 10, Manchester.
If the Prime Minister is still undecided as to the shape and terms of Brexit and whether to announce in her party conference speech the date in which the UK will trigger Article 50 and start the whole thing, her International Trade Secretary is steaming ahead anyway with his own vision. Brexit, according to Liam Fox, will be a deal which will make our trade with the European Union at least as free as it is now. It'll be a hard exit. We'll be out of the single market, outside the customs union. And a key thing, he wants Britain to take its seat as the World Trade Organization, not in a bloc anymore, obviously, but as an independent member. Adam Parsons joined me. So, is this an agreed policy, or is this just Liam Fox shooting from the lip?
This is pretty much what happens, but this is Liam Fox giving a speech today and setting out his vision of what Brexit is going to look like. Now, we know that when you leave the World Trade Organization as part of this relationship with the EU, you take up independent membership. That can mean staying in the single market. Norway do that, but in this case, I don't think it will. Liam Fox, in his speech today, mentioned the World Trade Organization no fewer than 8 times, and he mentioned the single market just once. And I think that what we got was not exactly a barnstorming speech here, Kirsty, but one with plenty of history lessons in there. There was a bit of Adam Smith, there was a bit of Cornwall, and there was lots of him talking about the value of free trade to the British economy and how he wanted us to be right at the forefront of that, to look beyond Europe and to embrace trade with the rest of the world.
I believe that the UK is in a prime position to become a world leader in free trade because of the brave and historic decision of the British people to leave the European Union. Those who believe that the referendum was a sign of Britain looking inwards have it completely, 100% wrong. It is the beginning of Britain increasing it's global engagement.
But no specifics, no talk of different sectors, no talk of manufacturing, no talk of service sector, and certainly no talk of the financial services sector, which of course is hugely valuable, most valuable part of our sector.
Yeah,
economy.
very, very few specifics here. We had no date. We had nothing about whether it would be a hard or a soft Brexit. Lots of people reading into this that it will be hard. And as you said, nothing at all about specific bits of our economy. And there are two things there, two bits that I think we should look towards. One is the automotive sector, which has been very loud in its lobbying. And today, almost as Dr. Fox was speaking, Carlos Ghosn, the chief executive of Renault Nissan make 500,000 cars a year here in the UK, saying that he would be looking for compensation if tariffs were imposed on his car. But the other one, financial services, the biggest export bit of our economy. That is a sector where lots of people I've spoken to recently say that they are confused, they want some guidance, that they, more than anything, the city hates a lack of information. That's what they had at the moment. If they were expecting answers and clarity today, they didn't get it.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. Well, some clarity now maybe, because joining us is Gerard Lyons, the co-chair of Economists for Brexit, and Rain Newton-Smith, chief economist from the CBI. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Gerard Lyons, how did you interpret Liam Fox's tone?
Well, I thought it was a good speech in the sense it was about global Britain. And it's been very important since the referendum result for the UK to convey to the rest of the world that we are thinking globally. It's not just about a good relationship with the rest of the European Union, but it's about our ability to sell our goods and services internationally. And as has been mentioned, he talked about the World Trade Organization. You're right, it was short and specifics, but I think one part of the whole debate is about the need to have a global British story.
So do you think this was him setting out the ultimate position and you negotiate backwards?
Well, no. Well, in terms of the whole debate, people talk about hard versus soft Brexit. I tend to call it a clean versus a messy Brexit. And what Liam Fox was talking about today was more along the lines of a clean Brexit. That is, having a clean break, having control of sovereignty, migration. He didn't touch on that, but something we can fall back on, we can trade internationally, and against that backdrop to then possibly do a deal, a bespoke deal with the European Union.
Now, Rain, the CBI's position, obviously pre-referendum was remain, so you're making the best, as you would see it, a bad deal. But what is the deal then?
I mean, I think, just to pick up on a few things earlier, I think I don't know a single sector of the UK economy, a single business that doesn't think about what this might mean for their business. So I think it is something that touches on all sectors. And I think at this stage, it's sensible to not get wedded to any one particular model. But I think we do need to see a bit more clarity about where we might end up, and importantly, what sort of transitional arrangements we might have. I think that matters for passporting, for financial services,
and passporting
but also
isn't just about financial services passporting, it's about Nissan and everybody else.
Exactly,
as well.
and I think that's one area that is one of these kind of misconceptions. I mean, passporting matters when
Let's be quite clear about how simple passporting is. Explain just how simple
So essentially what it is, it's if you're a financial services that operates in the UK, passporting allows you to operate in 27 other countries throughout the European Union. You know, easily without tariffs. And I think that matters for banks, but it also matters for car manufacturers. When we buy cars now, we often lease them, so we get financing alongside it, and that's really important to remember.
And this is completely unclear. And the point about all this is that these different sectors are having to make long-term decisions, and it's absolutely impossible to make long-term decisions when you don't even have a short-term plan.
Well, I agree. Basically, one needs to be pragmatic and realistic, and therefore uncertainty is the big issue. And therefore it's important to, at some stage, invoke Article 50 and not necessarily give away all our secrets in terms of negotiation, but to actually...
But we need a roadmap of some... I mean,
yeah, but there is a roadmap. The roadmap is to actually position the UK globally, and the roadmap is to actually have a sensible future relationship with the EU. Like, in terms of passporting, I've just come from a dinner in the city where the Chinese... It was about China and the UK, but the issue of passporting wasn't seen as important, but the issue of the city being innovative and developing products. But yet you can go to other sectors and other businesses where passporting, depending on the business model, is important. And we have to recognise that there is a broad church here, not just within the financial sector, but also you mentioned the auto sector. But let's not forget that the actual tariff that would be imposed on the UK outside of the EU, according to the House of Commons Library, was 2 to 3%. The auto sector is the highest at 10%, hence there's an issue there. But Germany, remember, sells a phenomenal number of cars to the UK, And
so it's not in anyone's interest then to have tariffs.
But as Liam Fox pointed out today, I touched on, if we were outside the EU, we can cut all our tariffs, which helps UK consumers. So the competitive balance changes, and this is a dynamic process, is the key thing.
I think one of the things we have to remember is, you know, when we look through the course of economic history, when people have gone for a sort of big bang approach, it's never worked out very well for the wider society. So I think wherever we end up, we want to have a clear partnership between government and business at every step of the way to really understand what the issues are.
Are you having those conversations with senior figures in government?
We're starting to have the conversations, but I think we do need to see a step up in gear. And
and it's fair to say, I mean, you know, you're a former advisor of Boris Johnson. There are very many different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah, why? Stopped advising Boris when he left being mayor back in May. But we are in an unfortunate position because the previous Prime Minister and Chancellor did not do any preparatory work. Thankfully, the Bank of England was prepared for all eventualities. And so there is a catch-up process here. And I completely agree that we need to have a proper discussion amongst not just business and government, but amongst the different sectors.
But do explain, because Liam Fox seemed to say it was a very straightforward thing. At the moment, we are, as a bloc, in the WTO. We will simply be an independent member of the WTO. But there's something beyond that, isn't there?
All right, the important message is this. If you have a clean Brexit, you control the situation. If you go for a messy Brexit, you have to depend on 27 other countries and the European Commission.
But Philip Hammond said in May that there has to be an access to the single market of the financial services.
The reality is we have to recognise we're one of 28 in that negotiating room. And I think, you know, the idea that we can just do things completely cleanly, this is going to be a long-running thing. I like to think of it as a marathon, not a sprint. We need to have the best minds in the UK from business, from government, working through what this means for
But there's nothing clean about years and years of negotiations.
No, actually, if you invoke Article 50, and if you decide that the
do you want Theresa May, as has been called from the backbench, do you want Theresa May in her speech next week to give the date for invoking Article 50?
I'm not in the Conservative Party. I'm
just asking as a human being.
No, I'm looking at this from an economic and financial perspective. Minimising uncertainty is important. But at the same time, as we've said, you need to have a clarity about what you want to do. So I would like it to be announced next week, but at the same time, invoking it in the first half of next year, and all of Whitehall working to a deadline that at the end of it, we leave the EU. So against that backdrop, we always have a fallback position.
With elections in France and Germany as well?
Yeah, you see, all these things have to be weighed up. But the important thing is you can only control in life what you can control. And therefore, we have to have a clarity about positioning ourselves
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it